Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Perdue, and I am a nerd. Actually, I call myself an infrastructure nerd now, so we'll change the opening to good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Perdue, and I am an infrastructure nerd. And today, you are here for our, what month is it? April 2010 virtual user group meeting that we, of course, affectionately call the water cooler. Mary Jo and I are talking about two things today. Mary Jo is going to start. She won the coin toss, or perhaps she lost it, but she's going to start and talk about making PracticeMaster screens look the way you want them to, or at least as close as we can come. And I am going to talk about transaction codes and go a little deeper than just the fact that TC might mean telephone conference with, and explain instead some other deeper hidden meanings of transaction codes. But before we do that, I'm going to pop this up and explain to people that they have something that looks probably just like this over on the right-hand side of their screen. And there are a couple things I want to point out. This big box is where you go to control GoToWebinar. Among other things, you can ask questions here. So if you're shy and you don't want to raise your hand, which we'll talk about in a second, you can type a question here. We will find it eventually, and we will answer it. So questions typed here will be reviewed by us and will be answered. But if you're not feeling shy, you can also click on this button here. In the rectangle that juts off to the left of the big blocks is this small box with a couple icons, and this button down at the bottom looks like a hand with an arrow pointing up. That means you're raising your hand. So raise your hand if you'd like to actually have us unmute you and let you ask your question. We'll pretty much leave you unmuted until the question has been answered, so you can ask any other questions, and then we'll mute you up again so that you can go on eating lunch and chewing into the microphone. This button here that looks, at least initially, like arrows that point to the right, when clicked, will collapse this box and get it out of the way in case it happens to be covering up part of my screen. And then once the box is collapsed, only this little part will be visible, and these arrows that now point to the right in this example will start pointing to the left, meaning that if you click it again, you'll be bringing this box back into view so that if you're shy, you can type your question here. Hopefully that explains everything, and I'm going to point out that somebody, who is it, Mary Jo?
Annie.
Annie has her hand raised. So let's unmute her and introduce her and ask her if she really has a question or if she just likes raising her hand.
This is Annie, and I just like raising my hand because I happened to hit the wrong button when I logged on.
That's all right. We'll forgive you. Okay, we're going to mute you back up so you can go on eating lunch. And I am going to press this button here, and I'm going to click here, and I'm going to turn it over to Mary Jo, who is going to talk about making PracticeMaster screens look the way you want them.
Hello, everybody. Okay, today I'm going to talk about just kind of showing you some different options that you have to make your screens look like you want them to look. We've talked about in the past how you can move your snapshot down here at the bottom and have it be, either on the side. If I click the little side button, if Paul lets go of the mouse.
I'm doing it right.
So you can, click the little side arrow and you can move your snapshot to the side. Or if you click the little down arrow, you can move your snapshot to the bottom. We've talked in the past about how you can go ahead and modify that snapshot and include different fields in different places. So that's one area that you can modify the look of your screen when you come in. The other area we've talked about before in other sessions is how you can also modify the column headings across the top. Maybe you don't like to see the client ID, client name, and then the alpha search and address. You might like to see client ID, client name, alpha search, and phone number first. You can change all of those column headings at the top to look like you want it to look. And again, these are all user-specific options that I'm showing you today. So that's another way to customize when you come in and try to find clients or look at your screen. You'll notice everybody has this little box on the right-hand side called our Quick Clicks. It's a real easy place to get in and make changes, and depending on what screen you're in, whether right now I'm on the client list screen, but if I were on the calendar screen or if I were on the related party screen, the Quick Clicks change based on what screen I'm in and give me different options. If you ever want to just get that quick clicks out of the way, there's a little pin over here in the corner. It looks like a little push pin. And if you go ahead and you click on that, it'll bump quick clicks over here onto the side. So you're pinning it to the side, and it gives you just a little bit more real estate here to look at your clients and your snapshot and things here, or any of your screens. If you want to get quick clicks back and look at it, you just go ahead and click that button, and then you can unpin it, and it's over here. Okay? So that's the different options here for quick clicks. And then while we're in quick clicks, I wanted to show you down here at the bottom, we've got Customize Our Current View. If you look on here, there's a couple of different options. You can refresh your screen here, so if you made any changes or you just got out, you can always hit refresh. But we've also got what we call List Preferences and Configure Client Pages. And so today I'm going to really kind of focus more on that List Preferences and the Configure Client Pages. Now again, remember, I am in the client screen, so I'm on the client list view, and when I'm using these options for my list preferences, it's applying it to the client screen only. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and you'll see it's going to open up a box that allows me to change how these clients are listed out. I can say that I want to show the grid lines or not. If I say I don't want to show them, you can see that it's going to go ahead and change and take those lines out of my screen here. I'm going to go in and unpin my quick clicks over here and pin it over here. So now if I go back in, I can go ahead and put the grid lines back in, and that will go ahead and show me my actual lines in there. If I go to my list preferences and I want my height to be different, maybe this is just too scrunched up here for me, I can go ahead and I can make it up to 4 lines, and you can see it's going to go ahead and expand how much space I have in there for my information. And what we really notice that is over on your notes screen or your comments tab. If you had more comments, and again, you can move that comments column over closer to the client ID and client name. Then you have to scroll over here like this every time. But your work description could be longer, and also, I know there's one in here somewhere. Should have moved that over to begin with, but
good thing everybody's muted because they're all laughing right now.
Yeah, probably.
Another place that it does work real well is in the journal when you've got notes.
Yes.
You're going to wrap.
Now I know we've got a comment coming up because we're into the last names. There we go. Comments right here. So if you did have some comments, now we don't. This is test data, so we don't really have a comment. But I'm going to bump over to the one over where it says profile. We've put in some comments here for our test data that tells a little bit about the case. And you can see that you can see all of those, or a little bit more of those comments in just one line. So that's where you can adjust that, and then anywhere in between. So you've got 1 to 4 lines that you can make this. So I'm going to bump it back to my 1 line. The next one is you can have, you can change the row color, and you can change the row 2 color. So every other row you can make a different color. So for an example, I'm going to change my first row to be yellow, and then I'm going to change my second row to be purple. And I'm going to come in and get a little lighter color. So again, you can hit the other, and you can get this whole basic colors that are in here, or you can choose any color off the rainbow here. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of get a little lighter color purple, and I'm going to make the next color that. And now when I say OK, you can see that my lines are now back to 1, and every other line is, you know, purple and yellow. And it just kind of makes it a little easier to find clients when you're searching. If you've got, you know, you don't have to have purple and yellow. You can choose the colors that you like, and that's how you can adjust that.
I will point out that out in the field I find that people particularly like this color changing thing, so they can make their journal one color, their calendar another color, and their client a third color. And that way when they look at a list, they have this visual cue as to what list they're looking at before they even look to see, is this the customer or the client, is this the journal, is this the calendar.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have to do both the colors. I mean, if you just want to do every other color is yellow, in my list preferences, I can go ahead and I can, well, if it's going to let me click on there. I think I've clicked it. There we go. If I just wanted, yeah, about 3 times here because I'm click happy, if I go to row 2, I can change that back to just white or whatever I want and just have yellow and white. I mean, you don't have to choose 2 specific colors here. You can just use whichever you want here. So if I go back and just use it as white, now just have the yellow and white. So you don't have to get too fancy in there. But it's just a way that you can break it up and see your clients individually a little bit better. I'm just going to flip out here to like the related party screen just to show you that even though I've changed it in my client, my related party is still here. And again, in my quick clicks, I can go ahead and I can customize that current view, and I have list preferences. And again, in related parties, I can specify different colors, like Paul said. And then if you go to your calendar screen and things like that, again, everyone is individual to meet whatever you want to put in there. So I'm going to go back to the client screen here. Maybe. A little delay here. All right, and then you'll see that on our customized current view for the client, we also had our configure client pages. And I did have it. I'm sorry, I'm like way behind here. There we go. Okay, configure client pages. Now, a lot of people don't know about this particular screen. And if you click on it here, it's going to take you into a window right here that you can configure what pages you see and what tabs you see across the top here. Right now, we've got the fee, the cost, document, calendar, related party page, and the area of practice pages all checked. And what that does is it goes ahead and it splits them out here. You can see on my list here I've got my fees, my costs, my docs page, my calendar page. They're all individual pages out here. And some of you like to do that. You like to have all of your tabs out there so you can just click on it. Others want to just see one tab that has all of those included. So what we can do is we can change that and just uncheck all of those and say we want to see one client-related page. And when I say OK for that, you'll see it's going to go ahead and it's going to shrink that up. And now I'm only seeing my notes, email, research. I'll show you about that in a minute. But if I click on that client-related tab now, when I open that up, it's going to show me all of those tabs under one. So now I can go into my journal from there, the calendar from there, or the fee, and it's just going to take me right to that window instead of having all the tabs listed singly out. Again, if you're not, you want to see all your tabs out there, I can come back to client, configure client pages, and I can say I want to see them individual, or maybe you want to see some of them and then others you don't. I mean, you can decide. And then I can just uncheck that client-related page, and that tab will fall off. The other thing down here, you can combine your journal page as well. So right now we've got our notes and our email and our research split out because we're showing those tabs. Or we can have one tab that just says journal, and then the client, email, phone, timer, all that will be in there that I can go ahead and click on it then. So again, that's just another way that you can look at things. If I wanted it all under one tab for my notes, I could then have just one journal tab, and then I could see all of my journal records under one. Okay. Now you can always sort in here. If I want to see that record type, and I want to see just all of my emails or all of my timer records, I can still go ahead and sort, and I will have them grouped together. So it's not like you have to have them in that order, or I can show it by date order and so on. I still have that flexibility there. It's just one tab, so it takes up just a little bit less real estate across the top of my heading here. Okay, so that's a lot of different information there that you can do under your customized current view. And again, each screen that you go into, your related parties calendar will have a different way to configure those views. Any questions?
Nope.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you, Paul.
Okay. And I'm going to go into a whole different program and talk about transaction codes. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize PracticeMaster, and I'm going to go into Tabs. I will mention, in between topics here, Mary Jo referred to some things she's talked about or I've talked about in the past relating to customizing the look of PracticeMaster. And so I made a note to mention the fact that for about 1.5 years now, we've been recording these virtual user group meetings, or these water coolers, and we do have them out on the web. Now, we haven't really gone so far as to put a page out on our website that lists all the prior sessions and what their topics were and gives you a link to them. That would be too easy. Or I guess maybe we are like the cobbler's children that have no shoes. Our website doesn't list the recorded virtual user group meetings that we already have. We will do that someday. We just haven't gotten around to it. And so if you want to see or get a link to any of the prior virtual user group meetings, please send me an email, paul.purdue@attorneycomputersystems.com. And it's Purdue is like the university, not the chicken, so it's Purdue. And I will send you a list of all the prior sessions, or if you have a specific one in mind, you can just tell me what topic you're looking for, and I'll send you a link specifically to that one. Now, I'm going to talk about transaction codes, and so here we are.
Paul, before you go in there, there's a question about, is there a quick way to increase font size on the PracticeMaster screens?
There is not within PracticeMaster. Now, if you go into Windows settings and change your font size, and I don't know if that's in graphics options or I think there is a place where you can go and change your default font, and that will apply to PracticeMaster, but it will also apply to everything else. So that's, for some people, that's a solution simply because they really want everything else to be a bigger size. Unfortunately, right now in PracticeMaster, we're limited to the one font and the one size in defining screens and defining all the different headings and lists of data. They all come out in that one font. Okay, back to tabs. We are on the main screen now, so I'm going to go ahead and click on Setup. And we're going to talk about transaction codes and some deeper things within them, deeper than just the fact that TC might be set up to mean telephone conference with, which you already probably are familiar with. Transaction codes are shorthand ways of entering time and describing things. So if I go into fee entry and I make a transaction entry for Kelly White's foreclosure for the primary attorney for what it thinks is today, 11/17/09 is where my demo data lives, and I put in TC for telephone conference with, it will pop telephone conference with into the description field. I can then go on and put in hours worked and have a compute, and I can also type in here whatever sort of a description I want to enhance that transaction code. And most everybody uses these, although we do have quite a few clients that don't. They just set up one that's blank and kind of type from scratch for every entry. But most don't use them for anything more than that. Now, there are a couple things you can do. For starters, I'm going to go ahead and pull up that TC, telephone conference with. When you're defining a transaction code, you have a number that you need to enter, and then you have the ability to also give it an alpha code so that instead of typing 3 for the transaction code, you can type TC and it will pop up this particular transaction code. You have the ability to define whether it's an expense, an advance, or a fee, pretty self-explanatory. And then you have the ability to define the type. Now, mainly what people have set up is normal and regular payment. If you click on the yellow question mark from within this transaction code setup screen, and then further click on the type link, clicked on the wrong thing, type, you will get a description of each code. Now, if you click on normal, it'll pop up and tell you that the normal code is really just what you use most often for your fees, expenses, and advances. And if you click on regular payment, you'll find that it is what you use to create a payment code. You will further, if you go in here and look, find that fee payment and cost payment allow you to define payment codes that will only apply that amount to the fees or costs. This is really kind of a carryover. In the older versions of the software, if you were integrating with General Ledger, you had to break down your payments by fees, costs, and advances. The system wouldn't do it for you, but now it does and has for many, many years. So these two types aren't really used very much. Description only is kind of cool. It allows you to create a transaction code that doesn't accept, once it's used, doesn't accept hours and amount and rates. It really just has a description. And if you give those description only codes, when you use them, when you use that code to create a transaction entry for Michael Larson, for instance, If you give it a date of something low, like January 1st of 1970, it will always appear at the top. So it's a way to add more descriptive text to the top of a statement before you get into the actual detail of the fees. That's kind of cool. It also allows you, if you give it that load date, to have those descriptive entries show up at the top of not only fees, which of course is also at the top of the bill, but also at the top of expenses and at the top of advances. So you can actually have descriptive text that appears before your advances by not using the statement notes that you might commonly think of as being a solution to wanting to have that text. This is just another way to do that. Miscellaneous, Mary Jo and I were just in here looking at this. Never seen it before, didn't even know it was there. It's just a way to have a transaction that you enter not have to have a transaction code. I don't think I've ever seen anybody use that. And progress fee is a special type that we use to set up monthly retainers, for instance. If you enter a transaction with a progress fee type of transaction code, you can bill the client $1,000 a month. Every time a bill is produced, if you're producing them on a monthly basis, then that's every month. It'll bill another $1,000 as a progress billing. Whole different topic, but that's what that type is for, that specific progress fee type. Description, everyone knows what that is. If you don't, it's basically where you just type the text that you want to appear within the transaction code. You can set up a specific transaction code or a group of specific transaction codes as being billable or non-billable. Now, of course, they default to billable printable, and that's what most people have set up. But you could create a transaction code called NC that says no charge for, and then when you enter the actual entry, you could explain for a telephone conference with client's attorney or whatever. And it would automatically default to non-billable when you use it. So as you may know, when we go in to add a transaction, I'm not going to save this, go back and add a fee, you have the ability to change the bill code to non-billable printable, but you can also just set up a specific transaction code that will make that happen so that attorneys who may be entering time directly into tabs can just say NC, and then they'll say what they're not billing for, and it'll still show up on the bill. So bottom line, you can have specific transaction codes that default to being non-billable, which is kind of cool. Pull up telephone conference with again. Now, not many people know this, but you can have a specific amount and a specific rate for a transaction code. Now, let me give you some examples. If you always charge 30 cents per page for copies, or you always charge $20 for each FedEx overnight delivery that you're billing as an expense, or you always charge $125 per hour for court appearances for your court-appointed work. You can set those up in the transaction code. Now, it's important to make the distinction. If I set up an expense or an advance code to have a specific rate or amount, it doesn't matter how I have the client set up, it will default to that amount. So if I go in and I say that I want to use the postage, or the mileage transaction code to enter some expenses for a client, it'll pop up and ask me for the number of units. I'll put in 50, and it'll multiply that 50 miles by whatever I've got as the rate down here, and create a total amount, just like 1 hour times $250 equals $250. 50 miles times 50 cents a mile equals $25. If you are using specific rates or amounts for transaction codes that are fee transaction codes, they will not work unless you set up a client a certain way. So for instance, if I go in to add a fee and I haven't set the client up to specifically use the rate or the amount from the transaction code file, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to pull in that rate. But if I do go into the client setup and I go to the rates screen and I tell it that I specifically want to use the transaction code rate or amount for the billing rate, the fee rate, then it will pull those. Okay, so don't set up fee rate transaction codes with specific amounts or rates unless you understand that the client would have to be set up to specifically use those, because otherwise it'll be disappointing to you because it won't work right. But with costs, there is no need to set anything up specifically. If you go into cost and use a transaction code that does have a specific rate or amount, it will default to that, which is really cool for things like mileage and copies. And another example is court costs or filing fees. Maybe you have a transaction code for filing fee for domestic relations court, and it's always $125. You can put that amount in there for the transaction code amount right down here, and that will default every time you add one of those. There is the ability also, if you happen to be using defining a transaction code that's a cost type as opposed to an advance or expense, to define the cost type. Now, the cost type is found over on this other tab here, this miscellaneous description tab, where one of the things you can specify is cost types. And when you click on that radio button and get over to the cost type screen, you can define your cost types for both expenses and advances. You can then create transaction codes. Let me pull that one up again. And I'll remember this time that it's 109. That fall into those specific cost types. Now, why would you want to do that? A couple reasons. A, you may want to summarize. There are reports that you can print that show you your transactions that have been entered into the system by cost type instead of by transaction code. So if you set up your cost types the way you want them to be, then you can say, show me all the postage and courier fee related transactions that we've entered, and it will, any transaction code that is set up to fall into that cost type will show up on that report. The other thing is that you can subdivide or subtotal your bills by cost type, or you can simply kind of compress or condense by cost type. So let's say that you have transaction codes for FedEx, UPS, standard mail, overnight mail, and maybe there's a lot of hand-delivered services that you could be using for hand delivery of documents, and you've all given those a cost type of courier services. You can then tell it in your setup for the client, the individual matter, as to how their bills look. You can tell it to subtotal those or to simply compress them, so that if you told it to compress them, it will actually take all 20 items that add up to $150 for courier services, and instead of listing each of the 20 items on the bill, it will simply say courier services $150. So it's really neat to be able to define these cost types and then throw transaction codes into specific cost types for your advance and expense transaction codes, and then use that to get things over there. Another way is that I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mary Jo, that you can post to GL for payment reimbursement by cost type as opposed to transaction code. So you can, if you're keeping track of reimbursement for courier fees separately in your GL from reimbursement for court costs, you can define these cost types and define how your payments for those costs post to GL. Okay, a lot of things that can be done with cost types, and it all starts here by going to this miscellaneous description tab, or coming in from the menu, just clicking on cost type, and defining your expense and advance cost types, and then throwing your transaction codes into the appropriate cost type as you set them up. One more thing I want to tell you, you can, if you've set up a rate, let's say that mileage rate you have set up at 58.5 cents a mile, and I believe that was the 2008 rate. I think in 2009 it went down to 55 cents. I may have my years wrong. Maybe in 2009 it was 58.5. Don't sue me. But so now you've got a transaction code for mileage. We'll pretend this says mileage, that has a rate of 58.5 cents. And you are in the end of whatever year it is, 58.5, and you look at the IRS website and it says, starting in 2010, we're going to change that to 55 cents. And I didn't do this quite right, because we aren't really charging $58.50 a mile. We're charging 0.585. And now, come January 1st, 2010, we're going to change that rate to 55. Okay. What you are telling the system is any transactions that are entered with a date before 1/1/2010 should be billed defaulting to 58.5 cents a mile. Any transactions entered with a date after 1/1/2010 should be entered with a default rate of 55 cents a mile. That means that come January 2nd, somebody could be entering transactions from December of the prior year, and they will default to 58.5 cents a mile for reimbursement. And when that same person or somebody else enters a transaction using the same code with a date of 1/1 or after, it'll default to 55 cents a minute, 55 cents a mile. So it's a kind of a neat way, and we also have this in the timekeeper file. We've talked about it before, but it's also available here. Now, at some point, you're going to say, okay, I'm done entering time or expenses, I should say, mileage expenses for 2009. And what you'll want to do, I'm going to save this first, what you're going to want to do, and go back to it, is then move the rate. And when I click this Move Rate button, it takes the 55 and throws it over here, because that's now the effective rate, blanks out the date and blanks out the new rate, so that next year, if the IRS changes the mileage rate again, you'll be ready for that. Okay? And that is about as much as I have time or inclination to talk about with relation.
Paul, we have two questions.
Okay.
The first one is, if you enter time through PracticeMaster, is there a way to use transaction codes? Yes, they're the same transaction codes that you have in Tabs. They're available in PracticeMaster.
Yep.
So you can just use the same codes. If when you're entering time over there, you'll have a little T code button. Just do the
You
drop
should have
down.
the same defaults, and everything should come up the same way. Now, one thing we'll warn you, and this is funky to some people, it's funky to me, when you enter something in PracticeMaster, the amount and rate and the other defaults, like non-billable, if we had set up this transaction code to be non-billable, they don't really apply until you save it. That is different than Tabs. You're used to, if you go into Tabs and put in 2 hours and it knows the client, knows the timekeeper, it'll pop that rate right in. But because you're entering in PracticeMaster, it doesn't go out and make a call to Tabs to say, what is the rate for this matter for this timekeeper, until you hit the Save button. So that is different, but they will still work the same way. You just get a different time when that default information comes in. What's your question?
The second question is, if you set up a client to accept transaction-related charges, can you also enter time-based entries? And that is no.
Well,
you have to decide.
You can, but it's a matter of what it's going to default to. Now, let me give you an example. I have several clients, or me and Mary Jo have several clients, that do a lot of court-appointed work. And they have a certain hourly rate that they charge for all clients when they're doing court-appointed work in the office, and a slightly different, I think it's a slightly higher hourly rate that they're allowed to charge when they're in court. So they set those clients up to be charging the rate from the transaction code file, and then they set up two very specific transaction codes, one for non-court work and one for court work for these types of clients. And then they always use those codes. So Mary Jo's right, it's one or the other. But you can always change. It's really just a matter of what it is defaulting to when you go in to enter the fee. It doesn't mean you can't. Let's say you've got a transaction code with a rate of $125 and another one with a rate of $200, and you've set up a client to base the rate on the transaction code. And you go in and you put in, one code and it defaults to $125, and you say, well, this time I want to charge $150. You can always change that. So what it's doing is it's determining what you're defaulting to, not what you're limited to. But of course, who wants to have to know what the rate is for each matter, for each client, for each timekeeper? You don't. When you're entering transactions, you really want it to default, and the default is the important distinction. Any other questions?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. Did Annie raise her hand again?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, that is it then. That is the end of the April 2010 water cooler or virtual user group meeting. If anyone finds that they do uncover questions after the fact, you can simply email us, maryjo.blum, which of course you would think was spelled B-L-U-M, but it's not. It's B-L-O-H-M at Attorney Computer Systems, or paul.purdue at attorneycomputersystems.com, and we'll answer those questions if you want to email them to us. But otherwise, we will see you next month at the May 2010 water cooler. Thanks, everybody, and have a good afternoon.